Okay, welcome folks to a short video with an overview of some thoughts and suggestions and strategies for, as the title suggests, engaging with and creating culture, history, and creatures within your fantasy stories. So let's start with a concept of something that I want to call cultural touchstones. So when I think about creating a world, and this could really apply to a non fantasy story as well. We have to touch on these things in the world that we know, in the world that we exist in. But when I'm thinking about creating a fantasy world, one of the things that I think is important is these things that reveal how the people of that world live their day to day lives. So I like to think of this as kind of three conceptual categories that you can think about, different sort of levels of this. So there's the individual, there's the interpersonal, and the societal. So let me explain what I mean by each of these briefly. So I talk about individual. I think about if I am following a specific character through their day to day life. What are the things that they do? What are the things that they think about? What are the things that plague them emotionally, intellectually, or that weigh on them, that reveal cultural norms? Think about what their class is in the world, and we'll get into some societal things in a second. But just what are the things that they do that show us larger glimpses of the norms of that world? If they pray to a particular god every morning, that reveals something. If they have to go pay their taxes for something every third of the month or whatever. So those are these day-to-day things that individuals do that reveal the world that they live in. At the interpersonal level, I like to think about when characters interact with one another, not just the people that they know deeply, but strangers as well as people in between. Somebody who's going shopping at a market, or goes into a tavern or whatever. The way that characters interact with one another, especially things that are often affected by identity markers, which could be occupations, skin color, um, socioeconomic class, et cetera, et cetera, that show us what social stratification is like and how different roles within the world are viewed against one another. Okay. In terms of when we see those interactions, those reveal lots of things. And then at the largest level is uh, sort of habits, practices, ceremonies, etc., and quote unquote demands that all people in a particular group experience or partake in. And these can be reflected, of course, in those individual and interpersonal things. But they're just the larger category that you can think about. What are the things that large groups of people in specific groups are experiencing or expected to do in the world? And all of these are the things that add up to really giving us that cultural flavor of a large group of people. Okay, so those are those three ways that you can think about this and how those all manifest in the worlds that you've built up. Okay, so then I also want to talk a little bit about history, um, and that has to do with historical markers. So every world has these major markers of history, and some of you have probably talked about these in your world building pages. So these are often tied to the culture that exists in your world. If you think about it, the past of the world, quote unquote, creates the present. Think about our own world. The reasons that many cultural groups exist in the ways that they do is because of how they either have been treated or treated others throughout history, right? Our present is very much determined by our past. So, what you can think about is the major events within a world's history and how those events are the focalizing points for the way the world works. But also, don't forget smaller events. We think oftentimes as storytellers in terms of the big, cataclysmic, terrible things, but also the large celebratory things. But it's also smaller moments that make up the lives of people. Okay. So thinking on both levels is something that you're certainly going to want to do. You want to think about how you can incorporate both the details of the past. So this is what happened 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, etc., but also the ramifications of the world's past. This thing happened, and here were its ripple effects, right? And again, you can think at both a large and a smaller scale. And I think you'll see in some really interesting ways how our model texts sort of buoy and balance the two. So, when it comes to creatures, monsters, I would say that bringing unique or not so unique creatures, broadly defined, into the world of a story that we write in fantasy is not just one of the things that readers expect. They want to see into the creative mind of the writer and what it is that they have done with monsters and creatures, but also is one of the things that we as writers of this kind of thing really like coming up with. Right? There's sort of creative joy in getting to put together a world full of these kinds of creatures. So the thing that you do want to think about, though, is be careful about how you get caught up in creature creation. Okay. So one, also beware of falling into cliches. I see all the time, and there's nothing wrong with this, using trolls, orcs, ogres, mermaids, elves, dwarves, whatever. But there is a fine balance between tapping into what readers expect and what will be too cliche, right? You don't want your creatures to be too exactly like every other version of them that we've seen before. And the other thing to be aware of here with this getting caught up in this creature creation is there's all sorts of fun to be had in creating these kinds of creatures. But one, don't overbook your book or your project. There is such a thing as trying to incorporate too many kinds of creatures that readers just get overwhelmed. But also make sure there is some value in the invention of or depiction of these creatures. You don't want to just have monsters for the sake of monsters. You want them to have some meaning and function within the story that you're telling. Okay. Um, and like I said, there is this delicate balancing act between what I call expectation and innovation. You're going to have readers that want things to be very much like they are used to, but also they want to see something at least slightly new. And this can be tricky, right? Finding that balance between what a reader expects a certain kind of creature to be like and what you do that's different. And like so many other things, this is often a matter of guess, test, and revise, right? Create the creatures, have readers take a look at them, and help you figure out how they might need to be adjusted. Okay, that's really it for this